Is this the disappointment of the year so far? I know Unicorn Overlord is like very well received. I've given positive coverage of it. I know people are like nonstop comparing waifus and strategy and stuff like that. Like there's no denying that like there are positive things about Unicorn Overlord. Like I'm definitely happy that it's outperforming, absolute travesties like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, right? I'm happy that it's like been as successful as it is, especially after 13 Sentinels was kind of polarizing and kind of controversial, didn't do well initially. I I have I really thought going into this that Unicorn Overlord would absolutely be my favorite game of the year, right? Like you can look on my top 10's most anticipated games of 2024 list. Like you can see that like Unicorn Overlord was like number one. Okay, it was above Princess Peach Showtime. It was above like Mamoru. It was above like Yeast 10. It was above Penny's Breakaway. Like there are all these great games coming out in 2024 for Nintendo Switch that like Unicorn Overlord. Oh man, that's what I was really looking forward to. That's what I thought would be absolute killer. And a reason for that was because like I had been so obsessed with Vanillaware recently. Grim Grimoire was great, and 13 Sentinels is I think honestly probably going to be one of my favorite experiences on Switch, right? I loved 13 Sentinels. Okay. So to play Unicorn Overlord and like slowly going through this realization that like it's really, really good, but it's not as good as 13 Sentinels is kind of like a real, like painful thing for me to admit, right? Like this is unfortunate, it really is, but Unicorn Overlord does have a ton of problems, right? It is too easy. There is not a whole lot going on. The plot really isn't all that interesting. The visuals aren't good. The characters aren't fleshed out enough, right? Like the game just all in all just is trying to be Fire Emblem but doesn't hit the same level of quality, right? And I know like the meme among Vanillaware fans has always been that like, oh, this is gonna stop Fire Emblem. This is gonna ruin Fire Emblem, especially after Engage. Bro, like this isn't even competing with Engage, right? Engage is the most polarizing Fire Emblem game in a long, long time, right? And even then, even with all the things Engage did wrong and all of its like shortcomings and all its issues, like I still think it was way, way better than Unicorn Overlord. It does have stunning visuals. It does have like a charming story. It does have interesting characters, great individual scenes, right? And there are examples of that in Unicorn Overlord, right? Like I said, Unicorn Overlord is not by any stretch of the imagination a terrible game. But when you like compare the two side by side, like you do realize that like, wow, I do have fond memories of walking through the continents. Like I do have fond memories of like meeting these characters, meeting Ivy, like seeing Panette for the first time, seeing uh like the climax, the really amazing final boss, right? From Fire Emblem Engage, right? Like there are just so many things about Engage that just are just phenomenal and were just unappreciated at the time. Like I think very much that like Fire Emblem Engage eventually is going to have a very strong dedicated cult following, right? As opposed to like the mainstream appeal that Three Houses has. I do think Engage is quite a bit better than most people give it credit for, right? And I do think, as someone who has played both and has put about the same amount of time as in both, right, that I did have significantly more fun with Fire Emblem Engage. The gameplay was better. The characters were better, right? Like you end up like repeating the character lines more, like devoted to you, or like you just have like things about Engage that just stick out to you as just being like a phenomenal experience. But with like Unicorn Overlord, like what does it do better than Fire Emblem? Like you can't say it has a darker story than Fire Emblem because it doesn't. You can't say it has more interesting characters because it doesn't. You can't say it has better strategy because it doesn't. You can't say it has better artwork because it doesn't, right? Like I do think that Fire Emblem Engage is objectively more beautiful than Unicorn Overlord. Like just look at the way the characters move when like you select them, right? Like the 3D models just doing their thing. Like I never got tired of it. Like that game is like very, very pretty. And you don't see like a ton of people like acknowledge that because of how like overly animated they are, right? Uh, like, what does Unicorn Overlord do better than Fire Emblem Engage or Fire Emblem in general, right? Like, it took them 10 years to make a cheap copycat of Fire Emblem, right? That's really all this is. Like, you can say, like, oh, it plays more like Ogre Battle all you want, but, like, the reality is, like, it's competing primarily with Fire Emblem, you know? And, like, it's not leaving as much of an impact, Like, it's just not as good as a game, right? And what's more is that we're not going to get a follow-up title. That's the thing that people like are kind of delusional about right now. Is that like, oh, Vanillaware is totally going to put out a Unicorn Overlord too. After, I don't think that's likely, honestly. Like if they make a sequel, it'll probably just like they'll probably like change the gameplay so much that like it's not even gonna be the same thing. What would a sequel even be about? I think it's about time they go back to like making their action RPGs, right? Like, I remember when 13 Sentinels came out, like plenty of people were complaining about them not like making more like Dragon's Crown or Odin Spheres or whatever. Like I'm mostly interested in their strategy game, but at the same time, like, yeah, maybe it is time for them to do something a little bit different, right? Like, why would we want like another Unicorn Overlord like after this? Like, if anything, like one of the things I noticed when playing this, like it feels unfinished, right? You have all these plot lines that don't feel like they go anywhere. You have all these characters that don't really do anything, right? Yana is like only relevant in like Alfheim. Unifi is only relevant in Bastorios, which is like 90% wilderness, and all you do is just like wander around until you get like find the Bastorios. Like, you have like the characters just there are too many characters and they don't give enough development. They don't get enough involvement in the plot. You can't interact with them enough, right? And like you have report conversations, like report not support conversations, report. Like that's how unoriginal this game is. You have report conversations, but like the way they're structured, like unless you deliberately want to seek them out, like you're not gonna find them, right? And if you do, it's just like some lame, like just characters interacting. And like you do get to learn a little bit more about them and they do have like interesting backgrounds and perspectives and stuff like that. It's nice seeing the characters do have a little bit of personality, but it's really not that much compared to what we get in Fire Emblem these days, right? When you compare it to like how Unica in Fire Emblem Engage, right? Like how many people know like what her background is and like why she acts the way she does and how like if you don't like go through like several support conversations and piece together like what she actually is, like you're not gonna figure it out in the plot. But like in Unicorn Overlord, like none of the characters have that much depth. None of them have that kind of appeal. None of them like really, really try to none of them are really able to have the same kind of impact, right? They simply just aren't as interesting as the Fire Emblem cast. Unicorn Overlord is simply not as good as the Nintendo IP.